Judges chapter 9. I bet you think I'm going to talk a little bit about Syria and their chemical weapons, don't you? Oh, I am. On Sunday. You're going to have to come on Sunday. That's, of course, if they haven't already used them, but oh my goodness. And then Egypt today with Morsi, boy, you know, he tries to calm things down and he actually made things worse. You know, what he basically confirmed was that I am a dictator. And if you thought Hosni Mubarak was a dictator, baby, you ain't seen nothing yet. That's a very loose paraphrase of what the president said. But anyway, very interesting. Of course, that's Isaiah 19 and Isaiah 17 with Syria. So we're going to talk about that at length on Sunday morning for our prophecy update. But for tonight, we're in Judges chapter 9 as we make our way through the Bible from Genesis to Revelation, chapter by chapter and verse by verse, one book at a time. I must warn you, though, this is an ugly chapter. I don't know, for those of you who may have read ahead to stay ahead, you might already know what we're in store for. It is not pretty. It's very gnarly, but the lessons that are in it are extremely valuable and important. So why don't we pray? We'll ask God's blessing on our time and we'll get into the Word. Father, settle us down and center us and focus our attention so that we're not distracted by anything. Lord, we want to give you our undivided attention so that we can hear you speak as you minister to us. Lord, there's so much here that is set before us in this chapter. And unless the Holy Spirit is given permission to give us insight into why a chapter such as this would even be in our Bibles, this is going to be an exercise in futility, and we're keenly aware of that. So with that, Lord, will you now teach us by the Holy Spirit and minister to us from your word, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, let's just jump in, verse 1. Then Abimelech, whom we were introduced to in the previous chapter, the son of Jerubbaal being Gideon, sort of a nickname after Gideon had tore down the altar of Baal at his father's house. They sort of nicknamed him Jerubbaal, speaking of Gideon, went to Shechem, to his mother's brothers, and spoke with them and with all the family of the house of his mother's father, saying, "Please speak in the hearing of all the men of Shechem, which is better for you, that all 70 of the sons of Jerubbaal reign over you, or that one reign over you? Remember that I am your own flesh and bone." And his mother's brothers spoke, verse 3, all these words concerning him in the hearing of all the men of Shechem, and their heart was inclined to follow Abimelech, for they said, "He is our brother." Well, Abimelech may be their brother, but he's certainly not our friend, nor is he their friend either, as we're going to see here soon. Now, we start off chapter 9 with the account of this Abimelech, and it seems like at first glance that it's out of place because he's not really a judge. He's not a deliverer. He's Gideon's son. He's actually one of Gideon's 70 sons who was born to one of his concubines. You might remember we were told that in the previous chapter, he took many wives and had many concubines, and he multiplied much in and by way of gold and riches, which was to his own peril. But here in the first 3 verses, we're told that this Abimelech is somehow able to convince, maybe better said, con his Shechemite brethren to make him his father's successor, the only successor of all of his 70 brothers. In a sense, he's promoting himself over and above the rest of his brothers, all 70 of them, and here is convincing them to make him their king, their ruler, to rule over them. Listen, this is what I call self-promotion, self-exaltation, selfish ambition, all of the above. This is Psalms 75, verses 6 and 7. It reads, "For promotion cometh neither from the east, nor from the west, nor from the south. But God is the judge. He putteth down one, and he setteth up another." In other words, it's God who exalts. It's God who promotes. Promotion comes neither from the east nor from the west. It comes from the Lord. Let God exalt you. See, if man exalts himself, God will humble him. Whereas conversely, when man humbles himself, God will in turn exalt him. It's God who does the promoting, God who does the exalting. Not only is this self-promotion and exaltation, it is absolutely evil. And it's going to get really ugly really fast. It's as if he's launching a campaign, you'll forgive the metaphor, to be elected as their ruler, and the way in which he'll go about it will be so wicked in that he will eliminate all of his opponents. And it's the way he does it that is particularly evil. Now, it's important to understand that the Shechemites are predominantly Canaanites. This is the area known as Shechem. And what Abimelech is doing is he's appealing to them as one of them and as them being in his particular political party, if you will, to keep with the metaphor. Now, it's going to get worse. Verse 4, "So they gave him 70 shekels of silver from the temple of Baal Berith, with which Abimelech hired worthless and reckless men." That's putting it nicely. "And they followed him." Then verse 5, "He went to his father's house at Oprah Winfrey's." No, I just want to make sure you're still tracking. That's really bad, I know. "But he went to his father's house at Ophrah and killed his brothers, the 70 sons of Jerubbaal, Gideon's sons, on one stone. But Jotham, the youngest son of Jerubbaal, was left because he hid himself." Oh my goodness. This is, as I warned you, just the ugliest of ugly. Now, again, to borrow from our political metaphor, it seems that Abimelech is able to raise campaign funds, if you will, which he in turn uses to hire these thugs to run his dirty and ugly campaign. And the first thing they do, and if you can just imagine this, I mean, I know it's just words on the page of our Bible, but you gotta think through this, that this actually, really, literally happened. Imagine this. 70 sons of Gideon. They line them up and on one stone kill them. How? I believe that they beheaded them, all 70 of them, in this ritual slaughter, for lack of a better way of saying it, beheading them all on that same stone. This guy is pure evil. Save one. Interesting, it's the youngest son of Gideon whom we're told was somehow able to run and hide, I think the Lord gave him a way of escape and spared his life from this unspeakable act of terror, if I can say it that way, and for good reason, as we'll see here shortly. Now, lest you think that this is far removed from the world in which we live today, think again. This sort of evil happens all the time. Now, I know it's not those seeking self-promotion and exaltation literally assassinating anyone who poses a threat, any opposition. They do assassinate the character of those who pose a threat and present themselves as an opposition. I've seen it in my years in business and my years in ministry. I've started up and owned 2 businesses, and I've started and pastored 2 churches. And I can tell you from personal experience that this is very real in the arena of business and ministry. Now let me explain. There are those who have selfish, even satanic ambition, who will murder the reputation of others for their own exaltation over others. I was just talking with someone the other day about a church that had a split, and it's textbook. I could write the next chapter in this church split, in any church split for that matter. Oh, it's always cloaked in noble terms. It's a church plant. No, it's not a church plant. It's a church split. And the reason it's a church split and not a church plant is because you have demonized and criticized, and you have, to that one individual that is a perceived threat to you, so that they can be diminished, so that you in turn can be exalted. This takes place in marriage, by the way. It's so sad because it's that condescending husband who verbally abuses his wife to tear her down, to keep her down. Why? So he can continue to lord it over her and be exalted over her and control her. This is what Abimelech is doing in the context of his desire to be the ruler over all of the Israelites. And his 70 brothers, who could be candidates, if you please, are a potential threat to that. So what does he need to do? Well, they got to go. It's kind of a funny story. Years and years ago, when I first met my wife of 24 years, and she was at the time dating another guy who posed a threat, not much of a threat in comparison, but and I just remember, this is bad, isn't it? Listen, I wasn't a pastor then, so this is okay. But I just remember telling her later, after he was out of the picture, I said, the first thing I thought of when I saw you with him was, he's got to go. Yeah. And we have ways of making him go away. No. But I call him my people, and we take care of it. No. But no. But in other words, he's in the way of what I want. So in the context of ministry, someone who selfishly has that selfish ambition, wants to promote themselves and wants to be the pastor themselves, what are they going to do? Well, the pastor who is the pastor is in the way, so they have to go. They have to, get him out of the way, because they are a threat to what their ambitions are. Adam Clarke says it this way: a work begun under the name and influence of the devil is not likely to end to the glory of God or to the welfare of man. True story. I know I've probably shared this before, but it's been a long time since I have. And every so often I come across a passage that I think it's apropos to just share with you again from my own personal experience as it relates to the whole Abimelech model. Had on the mainland an assistant pastor that I had hired. And as time went on, I began to notice certain things happening and with the staff and with the people in the church. And it didn't quite rest right, but yet I couldn't quite put my finger on it. And I come to find out that the whole time, this guy is just talking stink about me behind my back. And I'm his employer, for crying out loud, you know? You fired! No, I didn't fire him. I wanted to. But interesting, he garnered a following of what would essentially be about half the church and split the church and went 9 miles down the road and started another church. And it was devastating. In fact, it was at that juncture in my ministry, even being new to the ministry, relatively young in the ministry, where I really questioned whether or not I wanted to continue on in the ministry. This is an Abimelech. He assassinated my character, false accusations, demonized me, criticized me, so that I would lose favor in the eyes of the people, and he would gain favor in the eyes of the people, and then once he had it, he could be ruler over them. Well, at that time, the Lord just kind of ministered to me how that, and then, in fact, I had a brother speak a word of knowledge to me, and he said to me, it's just going to be a matter of time, you'll see. In fact, I had one specific word of prophecy given to me by a brother. He said, you watch, he's going to leave his wife. I said, you got to be kidding me. He's been married for 30 years. He's not going to leave his wife. And what he said to me was, if a man will do that to a church, he'll do that to his wife. Because that's what it is. It's a divorce. A church split is a divorce. And the people in the church are like the children that are torn between the two parents who split, see. And I was just, I thought, man, this is, well, it'll be a true, prophetic word if it comes to pass. Sure enough, as God is my witness, I don't know how many years later, 4 or 5 years later, I get an email, and did you hear that they're divorced? He ended up with one of the gals in his church committing adultery, left his wife, and took a bunch of money, I guess, which I guess that comes packaged with it too. And it was exactly as he said it would be. Again, Adam Clarke, a work begun under the name and influence of the devil is not likely to end to the glory of God or the welfare of man. God can't bless that. When it started that way, in that spirit, under that influence, it's hands off. God won't bless it. In fact, it will be met with a catastrophic end. Well, let's move on, verse 6. And all the men of Shechem gathered together, all at Beit Milo. Beit is the Hebrew and Arabic word for house, house of Milo. And they went and made Abimelech king beside the terebinth tree at the pillar that was in Shechem. Well, interesting, it looks like he succeeded. I find it interesting that on the heels of this brutal, bloody slaughter, the beheading of 70 of his brothers, no less, that these men of Shechem would, instead of being repulsed in horror, they would embrace him as their king after what he had just done. Man, if that were me, I'd think, you know what? We're not off to a good start here. I don't think I'm going to vote for you. I don't think I want to elect you. I don't think I want you ruling over me, because what you just did to them, what's to say that you're not going to do that to me too? Oh, by the way, he will in a different way, but it's the same end result. Now, the reason I find this interesting is that the men of Shechem have no idea about what they're getting themselves into with this Abimelech. They have no idea whom they have just chosen willingly to rule over them. Now, here's what I'm thinking. If this is how a man gets into office, again, using our metaphor, you know where I'm going with this. I'm not going to go there, but if this is how he gets into office, what will he do once he's in office? I think enough said. In effect, they've just brought a curse upon themselves. Listen to what the prophet Habakkuk says in chapter 2, verse 12. It's written, woe to him, woe being a curse. Woe is not woe. No, woe. I know, it's just crazy, the Old Testament language. It doesn't mean anything like what it means today, but woe is a curse. In other words, you could say, cursed be him, a curse to him who builds a city with bloodshed and establishes a town by crime. Chuck Smith has what we call a Chuckism. He says, you strive to gain, you're going to strive to maintain. In other words, if this is how the work is begun, you've sort of set this precedent that in order for it to continue on, you have to continue doing what you did to begin with. See, at the root of the tree, if the root is not good, the whole tree isn't going to be good. If the root is bad, the tree will be bad. If the root is good, the tree will be good. Now, verse 7, when they told Jotham, he went and stood on top of Mount Gerizim and lifted his voice and cried out. And he said to them, listen to me, you men of Shechem, that God may listen to you. The trees, verse 8, once went forth to anoint a king over them, and they said to the olive tree, reign over us. But the olive tree said to them, should I cease giving my oil, with which they honor God and men, and go to sway over trees? Then, verse 10, the tree said to the fig tree, you come and reign over us. But the fig tree said to them, should I cease my sweetness and my good fruit and go to sway over trees? Then the tree said to the vine, you come and reign over us. But, verse 13, the vine said to them, should I cease my new wine, which cheers both God and men, and go to sway over trees? Then, verse 14, all the trees said to the bramble, you come and reign over us. And, interesting, listen, verse 15, the bramble said to the trees, if in truth you anoint me as king over you, then come and take shelter in my shade. But if not, let fire come out of the bramble and devour the cedars of Lebanon. Oh, well, since you put it like that. Worthy of noting, by the way, the very first recorded parable in all of the Bible. And it comes from this half-brother of Abimelech, this Jotham, the youngest brother of Gideon, who managed to escape before being murdered. Now, interesting, having just escaped Abimelech's massacre of all 70 of his brothers, he preaches, as it were, from this pulpit standing atop this Mount Gerizim, where just naturally, acoustically, you can hear at great distances. It's what I like to call God's PA system. There in Israel, especially with all the rocks, and for those of you who have been there with us, you can stand on one mountain and actually hear very clear what's being said in the valley, or even closer in proximity on another mountain. So that's what he's doing here. He's using this natural God-made PA as a pulpit to speak and teach this parable to them. And what's so fascinating about the parable is that it is such a perfect description of what has just happened in their election of Abimelech. The parable of these three trees. And I find it interesting that the first three trees, the olive tree, the fig tree, the grapevine, these trees in the Middle East, even to this day, are the most valuable trees in all of the Middle East. And conversely, the bramble, which by the way, is actually a thorn bush, not only is it of no value, it's good for nothing. It's low to the ground, it produces no fruit, and it produces no shade. Not only is it worthless, you can't even use the wood from the bramble to build anything because it splinters. Interesting. There's only one thing that this thorn bush is good for. You know what it is? Burning. Oh, how appropriate. What a coincidence. This is going to come in handy, and according to the parable, burning will obviously play a role, and yes, it will. A couple of thoughts I want to share with you. First, with respect to the olive tree, the fig tree, and the grapevine, notice all of them would have been able to produce not only shade, but fruit as well. But the thorn bush produces neither, yet it promises that it can. Did you catch that in the parable? Come and take and find shade under me if I am to reign over you. Are you kidding me? You're a thorn bush. You don't have any shade. You have thorns, no shade. So I'm not going to get too comfortable around you, let alone under you. But again, you'll forgive my overuse of the metaphor, but isn't that just like what politicians do? They promise something that they cannot, do. This thorn bush is promising shade. It cannot give shade. Okay, I'll try to lighten up on the metaphor, but it is so interesting to me that these leaders are wanting and will have, in choosing Abimelech, come under the rulership, the leadership of this thorn bush. To me, this speaks to how those who are worthy won't seek to be leaders. It's the fig trees, it's the olive trees, it's the grapevines amongst us, those whom God has used and made very fruitful are the very ones who don't see themselves as being the ones that should want or desire those positions of leadership. But isn't it interesting that it's usually the thorn bush that wants to seek those positions, self-promoting, self-exalting? They're the ones that, listen, I only share this because nobody, thankfully, has ever, in all of the years that we have been together here in this church, has ever said this to me, and I'm so thankful. And now after I share it with you, nobody's ever going to say it for sure, unless they're a visitor, but I've never had anybody come to me and say, I've got some, gifts, and I just want to be used, and I think you could use a little bit of help around here. When I hear, and let me tell you what the clincher is for me. When they say, I just lost my job, and I think God's calling me into the ministry. I'm looking for the door, man. Get me out of here as quickly as you possibly can. That's a thorn bush. That's a thorn bush. Well, that's not very loving, Pastor. No, think about this. God chooses the foolish to confound the wise, right? God doesn't call the qualified. God qualifies the called. The ones when I have, and some of you, have been on the receiving end of me coming to you and saying, hey, have you, how would you, would you pray about serving in this capacity or in this role? Or, what do you think about, doing this, here at the church? And, the first one is, no, you got the wrong guy. That's my guy. Now, when someone responds this way, instead, when I come to them and say, hey, would you pray about maybe serving, in this capacity? And when they say, well, it's about time that somebody actually recognized my talents and abilities. What took you so long? Where's the door? Again, because this is James. This is James chapter 3, verse 1. Not many of you should presume to be teachers, my brothers, because you know that we who teach will be judged more strictly. Listen, there's nothing wrong with ambition. It's selfish ambition. The one who desires that office desires a noble thing, but be careful and prayerful and count the cost. You know, sometimes people look at the ministry through these rose-colored glasses, and they think it's just all glamour and glitz. If you think that, will you see me after the Bible study? I'd be more than happy to tell you what the reality is behind the scenes, what it's really like, because it's not like that at all. I remember on the mainland, I had this guy, tell me, he said, wow, so what do you do, during the rest of the week? Like, are you kidding? What planet are you from? Are you kidding me? What do I do the rest of the week? Oh, of course I golf. I'm a scratch golfer. I just luxuriate all the time. I go out and eat all the time, can't you tell? And, then I come on Sunday and I get the easiest job in the world. Don't look at me like that. You're looking at me like, you do, right? No, I don't. It's 24/7. And I mean, I'm not complaining. It is a joy, but it is not easy, but it is worth it. I want to point out something else here that I think is worthy of noting before we move on. And it has to do with how the thorn bush threatens to devour them with fire. Again, the reason I point this out is that the thorn bush wants to lord it over them, reign over them, but if they, for whatever reason, are opposed to being lorded over, then the thorn bush will in turn on them and burn them. Now, think this through with me. Is this not true of those wishing to lord it over others? When the subjects of their lording over refuse to be lorded over, they're going to be turned on. Because now they're the enemy, they're the opponents, and they'll get burned, so to speak, figuratively speaking. Well, let's move on, verse 16. Now, therefore, if you have acted in truth and sincerity in making Abimelech king, and if you have dealt well with Jerubbaal and his house, and have done to him as he deserves, for my father fought for you, risked his life, and delivered you out of the hand of Midian, but you have risen up against my father's house this day and killed his 70 sons on one stone and made Abimelech, the son of his female servant, king over the men of Shechem because he is your brother. If then, verse 19, you have acted in truth and sincerity with Jerubbaal and with his house this day, then rejoice in Abimelech and let him also rejoice in you. But if not, verse 20, let fire come from Abimelech and devour the men of Shechem and Beit Milo, and let fire come from the men of Shechem and from Beit Milo and devour Abimelech. And verse 21, this is now, again, Jotham is saying all of this after the parable. It says in verse 21, and Jotham ran away and fled, and he went to have a beer. No, he went to Beer, and dwelt there for fear of Abimelech, his brother. Boy, I tell you, verse 21 is a life verse for me. After many a sermon, I have felt like running and hiding in fear. That was so bad, God. Surely I'm fired after that one. No. But after his sermon, after this parable, he runs and hides in fear, probably prudent, more than paranoid. But it's interesting that in likening Abimelech to the thorn bush, their choice of a leader will come back to haunt them. And what he's basically doing is he's prophesying and pronouncing this curse upon them that they will be burned. The fire will come out and devour them. Verse 22, after Abimelech had reigned over Israel 3 years, God sent a spirit of ill will. Interesting. Between Abimelech and the men of Shechem. And the men of Shechem dealt treacherously with Abimelech, that the crime done to the 70 sons of Jerubbaal might be settled, and their blood be laid on Abimelech, their brother, who killed them, and on the men of Shechem, who aided him in the killing of his brothers. Okay, these verses sort of beg the question of why it is that God would allow this evil man, this Abimelech, to rule over Israel for as long as 3 years before he sends this spirit of ill will, which is interesting in and of itself. We'll come back to that in just a moment. But why so long? Why let it go for 3 years? Listen, I don't like the word years in a sentence that's associated with my suffering. A trial, 3 years? That's way too long. I'm thinking 3 days. Let's get this dealt with and, over in 3 days. 3 weeks at the most, but not 3 months, and certainly not 3 years. So why would God wait for 3 years? Here's a thought. I think that God is giving them that which they deserve. They asked for it. They wanted this man as their leader, and so now it's like that saying, you've made your bed, now lie in it. You asked for it, now you've got it, and now you're just going to have to live with it. Here's another thought. This may be one of those times where God's delays are not God's denials. And what I mean by that is that God will oftentimes delay by design because he's accomplishing something, and to end it prematurely would thwart us of that which he desires to teach us in that process, as difficult as it may be, for as long as it may be. I look back in retrospect over some of the elongated trials in my own life, and as painful as they were, I'm so glad in retrospect that God didn't get me out of it or through it when I really wanted him to. I'm glad that I wouldn't want to do it again, but keep this in mind, you want to pass the test, otherwise you have to retake the test. You ever been in a trial and you've just had a trial deja vu? I have been here before. You probably have. How about this time you pass the test so you don't have to go through it again? You don't have to take it again. In other words, you want to learn everything that there is that God has for you in it, and you don't want it to be prematurely ended. You want it to run its full course so that you don't have to go through it again. There are things that God, just in that process of time, needs to teach us in those trials and in those times of difficulty and suffering. So, after 3 years of his reign over Israel, I find it interesting that God himself will send a spirit of ill will between them. Who'd have thunk? Here's why I say that. Have you ever tried to figure out how God's going to resolve a matter? I mean, you have this wicked man, this evil boss in your life, this coworker that is the Antichrist, and you're trying to, forecast and figure out and, kind of predict how it is that God's going to work all things together for the good. So you're thinking, okay, so they're going to get another job somewhere else. Yay, God, can we do that? Can they get a phone call from another employer and then they leave? Or better yet, I leave and get a better job and I'm out of here. Not have to deal with that person anymore. So we're trying to figure out how God's going to, resolve it. And who'd have thunk that he would send a spirit of ill will? What a great idea. God, get them to turn on each other. They're going to do it for me and instead of me. Here I am plotting and planning. I'm going to put, stuff in their coffee. This is just, hypothetical. I would never think of those things, and neither would you. We better move on. But this spirit, you don't think like that, do you? No. Yes, you do. Interesting, we're told that the Shechemites dealt treacherously with Abimelech. In other words, they're turning on him now because of this spirit of ill will. And now this is how they're going to even the score with the death of the 70 sons of Gideon. This is how it's going to be settled. Now, God clearly is going to bring judgment upon not only Abimelech, but on the men of Shechem who were obviously complicit in all of this. Their hands are not clean, certainly, and God's judgment will come, and it comes vis-a-vis this spirit of ill will. Never imagine that God behind the scenes isn't working. Even though it may seem like he's silent, even though 3 years go by and it seems like God's not doing anything, and seems like maybe even God has forgotten and all your prayers are bouncing off the ceiling, and here you are suffering at the hands of an Abimelech in your life. You have no idea what God's doing. Oh, God's already got it figured out. He just hasn't let you in on it yet. And he can't, because if he did, you would already want to get the wheels in motion. You'd be trying to help God out. Oh, spirit of ill will, that is so cool. Hey, can I help? Right? Because we want to, and then we just get in God's way and we make it worse. In fact, we end up making it take longer. Verse 25, and the men of Shechem set men in ambush against him on the tops of the mountains, and they robbed all who passed them along that way. And it was told Abimelech. Now, Gaal, verse 26, the son of Ebed, came with his brothers and went over to Shechem, and the men of Shechem put their confidence in him. So they went out into the fields and gathered grapes from the vineyards and trod them and made merry. That's the New King James way of saying, and they just got drunk. Okay, are we all right here? And they went into the house of their God and ate and drank and cursed Abimelech. Oh, interesting. By the way, this spirit of ill will has now set them against each other. They're robbing each other. They're talking stink about each other. And now we've got this new guy on the block, this Gaal, who has won their allegiance. And they get drunk, and he starts talking stink about Abimelech. Is that not what happens when one is intoxicated? Your inhibitions are, down, and your guard is down, and you say, not you, I'm talking about, the sipping saints, as they're called in other churches that don't, anyway, boy, I'm just really getting in a lot of trouble tonight, aren't I? But is that not what happens? Listen, I know that drinking alcohol kills brain cells, and I don't have that many left to spare, so I'm not going to drink for that reason alone. But if that weren't the only reason, this would be another good reason, because when you drink, you say things that you wish you wouldn't have said. And such is the case here with Gaal. He is going to regret the day that he cursed Abimelech behind his back while drunk. So then verse 28, Gaal, the son of Ebed, said, "Who is Abimelech, and who is Shechem, that we should serve him? Is he not the son of Jerubbaal, and is not Zebul his officer? Serve the men of Hamor, the father of Shechem. But why should we serve him?" Oh, this is getting interesting for a number of reasons, not the least of which is Gaal uses the race card. How so? Well, Abimelech, keep in mind, is half Jewish. His mom was the handmaiden or the concubine of Gideon. So he's got half Jew and half Canaanite. So what this Gaal does is say, hey, why serve this Hapa guy? Is that the right way to say it? I always know I'm treading on thin ice whenever I try to talk local kind. But this is why he asks them, why should they serve a man who is half Jewish and half Canaanite? Serve me. I'm Canaanite. I'm not half Jewish. Serve me instead. Now keep in mind, this guy is really drunk. And that's why he keeps saying things that he's going to regret later, and he's making these threats. That's another thing that drinking does. And I'm only speaking from, before Christ when I used to drink. But when you drink, you get bold, yeah? You know what I'm talking about? Some of you are going, I don't, just speak for yourself. No, yes, you do. And you get kind of, overconfident in it, and it's the alcohol speaking. Oh, that's the alcohol speaking. That's not you, that alcohol talk. No, that's you. That's really you. How when sometimes when you're really tired and you're, cranky and you're, cantankerous and then you kind of rip into somebody and then you apologize. Hey, I was really tired. I wasn't myself. No, that is yourself. It's just that when you're not tired and you're not drunk, you're on your best behavior and you've got your guard up and you keep that self, that real self, in check. Okay, let's move on. I'm getting really convicted here. Verse 29. If only this people were under my authority, then I would remove Abimelech. So he said to Abimelech, increase your army and come out. When Zebul, verse 30, the ruler of the city, heard the words of Gaal, the son of Ebed, his anger was aroused. And verse 31, he sent messengers to Abimelech secretly saying, take note, Gaal, the son of Ebed, and his brothers have come to Shechem, and here they are, fortifying the city against you. Now therefore, verse 32, get up by night, you and the people who are with you, and lie in wait in the field. And it shall be, as soon as the sun is up in the morning, that you shall rise early and rush upon the city. And when he and the people who are with him come out against you, you may then do to them as you find opportunity. So, verse 34, Abimelech and all the people who were with him rose by night and lay wait against Shechem in 4 companies. Now, verse 35, when Gaal, the son of Ebed, went out and stood in the entrance of the city gate, Abimelech and all the people who were with him rose from lying in wait. And when Gaal saw the people, he said to Zebul, look, people are coming down from tops of the mountains. But Zebul said to him, dude, you're still drunk, man. He does sort of say that. He says, you're seeing things. You see the shadows of the mountains as if they were men. So, verse 37, Gaal spoke again and said, see, people are coming down from the center of the land, and another company is coming down from the diviner's terebinth tree. I'm not seeing things. Then verse 38, Zebul said to him, realized he couldn't continue to pull the wool over his eyes, so to speak. He says to him, where indeed is your mouth now? with which you said, who is Abimelech that we should serve him? Are not these the people whom you despised? Go out, if you will, and fight with them now. In other words, put your money where your mouth is. Put your fight where your mouth is. So, verse 39, Gaal went out, leading the men of Shechem, and fought with Abimelech. And Abimelech chased him, and he fled from him, and many fell wounded to the very entrance of the gate. Then, verse 41, Abimelech dwelt at Arumah, and Zebul drove out Gaal and his brothers, so that they would not dwell in Shechem. And it came about on the next day that the people went out into the field, and they told Abimelech. So he took his people, divided them into 3 companies, and lay in wait in the field. And he looked, and there were the people coming out of the city, and he rose against them and attacked them. Then Abimelech and the company that was with them rushed forward and stood at the entrance of the gate of the city, and the other 2 companies rushed upon all who were in the fields and killed them. So Abimelech fought against the city all that day. He took the city and killed the people who were in it, and he demolished the city and sowed it with salt. Why would he do that? Because now they could grow no crops. This man is wicked through and through. He sows the fields with salt so that they're rendered useless and worthless. No crops can grow in the salt that's in the soil. So it looks like this Gaal gets his just due after all. But what I want to draw your attention to before we move on here is that it would seem that Jotham's parable has turned into a prophecy that's being fulfilled concerning Abimelech turning on them as the thorn bush. It's exactly as it was foretold it would happen. Now verse 46, when all the men of the tower of Shechem had heard that, they entered the stronghold of the temple of the god Berith, And it was told Abimelech that all the men of the tower of Shechem were gathered together. Then Abimelech went up to the Mount Zalmon, he and all the people who were with him. And Abimelech took an axe in his hand and cut down a bow from the trees and took it and laid it on his shoulder. Then he said to the people who were with him, "What you have seen me do, make haste and do as I have done." So verse 49, each of the people likewise cut down his own bow and followed Abimelech, put them against the stronghold and set the stronghold on fire, how appropriate, above them, so that all the people of the tower of Shechem died, about 1,000 men and women. Wow. You know what's sad is that he's just getting started, as we'll see here as we bring the chapter and the study to a close. But again, there's something here that I think we'd be remiss were we not to at least mention briefly. Notice that they take refuge in the temple of their god, Berith, thinking somehow that if they're in this temple of this their god, that they will be safe. Now think about this. We do this. We think we're safe under the shadow of the wings of those strong towers, those things in our lives that we seek refuge, that we seek solace. I don't know what they were thinking, that maybe somehow Abimelech would not attack them there if they were in the temple. Well, not only does he attack them, and this is hard, and we'll see this here in a moment, but not only does he attack them, he gets these wooden, he gets the wood, he sets it on fire, and he burns them alive. That's what thorn bushes do. Verse 50, then Abimelech went to Thebez, and he encamped against Thebez and took it. But there was a strong tower in the city, and all the men and women, all the people of the city fled and there and shut themselves in. Then they went up to the top of the tower. There's that tower again. So Abimelech came as far as the tower and fought against it, and he drew near to the door of the tower to burn it with fire. I don't want to get too graphic or too gory, but can you, again, this is one of those places in the scriptures where, the reality, the enormity of it can get lost in the text. We're just reading this in, the pages of our Bible, but listen, these were real people who were burned alive. Can you imagine the screams? They were doomed. There was no way out as the fire crackling beneath them, the heat rising up to them. They knew that they would be burned alive. I can't imagine a worse fate than to be burned alive. And imagine that this is what hell is going to be, that eternal fire, that gnashing of teeth. Can't even imagine. Verse 53, but a certain woman dropped, and listen, this is PG-13 right here, okay? So, but a certain woman dropped an upper millstone on Abimelech's head and crushed his skull. Cool. Then verse 54, he called quickly to the young man, his armor bearer, and said to him, draw your sword and kill me, lest men say of me, a woman killed him. Oh, my pride to the end. No, I don't want. Apparently this millstone that this woman dropped and crushed his skull with was not enough to kill him, and there's enough life left in him to, call his armor bearer and say, hey, put me to the sword and kill me. I don't want people thinking that a woman killed me. That would be terrible. Wow, when the mind is that, evil and warped and sick, there's just no end. But so his young man thrust him through and he died. I mean, what were his last words? Thank you for doing that. Verse 55, and when the men of Israel saw that Abimelech was dead, they departed, every man to his place. Thus God repaid the wickedness of Abimelech, which he had done to his father by killing his 70 brothers. And all the evil of the men of Shechem God returned on their own heads, and on them came the curse of Jotham, the son of Jerubbaal. So it ends, and this is how it ends for the Abimelechs in life. This is what they will meet at the end. They will meet their death. They will meet God's judgment. And, there's a lesson here. There's a life lesson here. And it's the reason why I believe that God would devote an entire chapter in the pages of Holy Writ to have it recorded throughout the ages. And it's a longer than average chapter at that. So the question becomes, why would God deem it necessary to include such a graphic account with all the graphic details of such an evil man? I think it's to teach us from his life. See, I think Abimelech teaches us that evil men, though it may seem as if they get away with wickedness for years or even prospering in their evil, in the end, God is not mocked. They will reap what they sow, and in the end, God will have the final word, and he will cut them down. I want to do something different. We've got about 4 minutes left. I want you to stand, and I want you to turn to Psalm 37. While I would love to read the entire psalm, it's a life psalm for me. It's the psalm that God has used many a time in my life to minister to me, to wait upon him in the face of unspeakable evil around me, sometimes being the recipient of wickedness at the hand of an Abimelech. Because really Psalm 37 speaks to the Abimelechs in this world, in this life. It's a Psalm of David. I'm going to read the first, I'll just read verses 1 through 20. Just follow along. I'm going to read out of the New King James. Do not fret because of evildoers, nor be envious of the workers of iniquity, for they shall soon be cut down like the grass and wither as the green herb. Trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and feed on his faithfulness. Delight yourself also in the Lord, verse 4, and he shall give you the desires of your heart. Commit your way to the Lord. Trust also in him, and he shall bring it to pass. He shall bring forth your righteousness as the light and your justice as the noonday. Interesting. Gideon's justice was brought forth and shined forth at the end of the day. Verse 7, rest in the Lord and wait patiently for him. Do not fret because of him who prospers in his way, because of the man who brings wicked schemes to pass. Cease from anger and forsake wrath. Do not fret. It only causes harm. For evildoers shall be cut off, but those who wait on the Lord, they shall inherit the earth. For yet, verse 10, a little while, and the wicked shall be no more. Indeed, you will look carefully for his place, but it shall be no more. But the meek shall inherit the earth and shall delight themselves in the abundance of peace. The wicked plots against the just and gnashes at him with his teeth. The Lord laughs at him, for he sees that his day is coming. The wicked have drawn the sword and have bent their bow to cast down the poor and needy, to slay those who are upright, of upright conduct. Their sword, verse 15, shall enter their own heart. Interesting. The sword entered Abimelech's heart. I totally lost my place. Hang on a second here. Their own heart, okay. And their bows shall be broken. Verse 16, a little that a righteous man has is better than the riches of many wicked. For the arms of the wicked shall be broken, but the Lord upholds the righteous. The Lord knows the days of the upright, and their inheritance shall be forever. They shall not be ashamed in the evil time, and in the days of famine they shall be satisfied. But, verse 20, the wicked shall perish, and the enemies of the Lord, like the splendor of the meadows, shall vanish into smoke. They shall vanish away. So be it, Lord. Let's pray. Lord, thank you so much for your word. Tough stuff tonight with the intensity of this account here in this chapter, but oh, so needed in its application to our lives, especially for anyone who might be here tonight who's really struggling and even suffering at the hand of an Abimelech who seems to go forward unchecked in all that they do. Lord, will you give us a perspective and allow us to see it the way you see it, so that we too can see the end, how it ends. That this isn't the end of it, that you'll have the final word and that you'll take care of it and you'll settle it. Lord, thank you that we can have that assurance. Lord, thank you that we have this example of this evil man here to teach us how it is that man will not get away with sowing without reaping, and thus mocking you in so doing. Lord, thank you.